They said the shutters never opened. No smoke rose from the chimney. No voice was heard from inside. Yet every night a faint light flickered behind the cracks of the door. Neighbors whispered that the woman within had lost her child. They had seen her swollen belly. They had seen her return from the midwife empty-handed. But she did not bury the child. She did not mourn in the churchyard. She locked herself inside. 2 winters passed. Food deliveries left at the doorstep vanished, but no one saw her. Some swore they heard her humming to someone in the night. Others swore they heard a baby crying, though everyone knew the child was dead. When the villagers finally forced their way in, the air was rancid. On the bed lay a tiny corpse wrapped in silk, untouched by burial. The mother sat beside it, lips cracked, eyes hollow, still rocking the bundle as if it breathed. But the walls told the darker story. Symbols scrawled in soot and blood, circles of ash around the bed, prayers twisted into shapes no priest could recognize. And the question no one dared to say aloud: had she been waiting for her child to rise? Or had something else been waiting with her? Her name, preserved in fragments of parish records, was Ali Devine. She had been known not as cursed, but as blessed. In her youth, she claimed visions of angels. Once at the age of 14, she collapsed in the chapel and spoke in tongues. The priest at the time declared it a miracle. Villagers brought her bread, kissed her hands, begged her for prayers. They called her chosen. But blessings turn to burdens when hope runs dry. In the famine years, when the crops failed and infants died before baptism, the people turned to Alice with desperate questions. Could she intercede? Could she heal? Could she preserve the unborn? When she married a stonemason and carried her first child, expectations grew unbearable. Some whispered the child would be born touched by heaven, a vessel of proof that God still looked upon their valley. The child did not live. Accounts vary. Some say it was born silent, some that it breathed only a few moments before stillness fell. But Alice did not let the priest carry it to burial. She clutched the body in her arms, screaming that it was only sleeping. When neighbors tried to reason with her, she cried out that an angel had promised her the child would rise. She shut her door. That door did not open again for years. At first, pity restrained the village. They left food, water, wood for her fire. When smoke still rose from the chimney, they told themselves she would emerge once grief softened. But then whispers began. A shepherd swore he heard her chanting through the shutters. Not prayers, but strange syllables no Christian tongue could shape. A serving girl claimed she saw marks burned into the inside walls when Alice left a window cracked, and others, swearing they heard a baby's cry, began to fear. The church sent a friar to investigate. He knocked, called her name, demanded she open. No answer. He threatened excommunication. Still silence. But when he pressed his ear to the wood, he swore he heard 2 voices. One hers, one impossibly small. Weeks turned to months. The villagers stopped leaving food. Some urged the priest to break the door, but fear held them back. If she was chosen by God, they might offend heaven. If she was touched by the devil, they might unleash him. So the house stood, a sealed tomb, a shrine, or a prison. No one could agree. But they knew one truth. Whatever lived behind those walls was no longer Alice the Blessed Girl. Something else had taken root, and it waited in the silence. The records of the town speak carefully, as if even ink feared her. They called her home Domus Silenti, the House of Silence. For 2 years, the door remained barred. Children ran past in terror. Lovers dared each other to touch the wall and swear they felt it hum. But silence is never perfect. Witnesses described sounds that leaked through the cracks, scratching, muttering, sometimes lullabies, broken and slurred, as though sung to a restless child. On winter nights, men carrying torches to the tavern swore they saw flickering lights inside, though no one entered or left. Inside, Alice was changing. What neighbors did not know, what only fragments of her own writing suggest, was that she kept the baby swaddled in cloth, laid upon an altar she had carved from her husband's workbench. She traced symbols across the beams in charcoal and blood. She claimed, in one surviving letter, that angels had marked her child as the herald of a new covenant. But if heaven delayed, she would prepare. The walls of her chamber became a scripture no priest had taught. Spirals, sigils, half-crosses twisted upon themselves. At the center of it all, the infant's body, preserved not by miracle, but by herbs, smoke, and salt that she renewed each week. She believed decay was only a trial, that flesh must resist rot until resurrection came. Her husband's fate remains uncertain. Some say he fled the house the night the child died, unable to endure her refusal. Others whisper he tried to reason with her, only to vanish. Parish notes hint at rumors of a man's bones buried beneath the floor, but no exhumation was ever recorded. The church grew restless. By the 2nd year, the local bishop had been informed. He sent a pair of inquisitors, not to accuse, but to inquire. They reported that Alice refused them, but when they lingered by the shutters, they heard her whispering, as though to an infant who gurgled back. The younger inquisitor fled in terror. The older urged patience, warning that to desecrate her house without proof could unleash hysteria. Still, the whispers spread. Merchants refused to pass through the town. Travelers carried stories of a woman who rocked a dead child and spoke in voices not her own. The town's name became a curse in nearby valleys. Even the faithful began avoiding the church, believing its shadow fell too close to her door. One night, a group of boys hurled stones at her shutters. One stone broke through, and they swore they saw a pale, withered hand clutch the baby against her breast, holding it up as though to shield it from harm. Their screams echoed down the street. The next morning, the priest found the broken window sealed shut from inside, boards nailed so violently they split. By the end of the second year, fear was stronger than pity. The villagers gathered in secret, debating whether to burn the house, whether to drag her out, but still they hesitated. For the strangest part was not that she had kept her child. It was that in the silence the corpse seemed to answer her. And no one dared ask. Was it only her voice they heard? The breaking point came not with fire, nor with decree, but with hunger. The town had suffered a poor harvest. Men muttered that their fields withered because of her sins, that the Virgin herself turned her face away. Mothers whispered that if the child was not buried, no other infant would thrive. Fear hardened into fury. On a late autumn night, the townsmen gathered with axes. They did not summon priests. They did not ring bells. They marched silently, as though every footstep carried a weight of dread. When they reached her door, they knocked once. No answer. Twice. Still silence. On the third, the captain of the group raised his axe and split the doorframe. What they found inside became the legend. The air was heavy with herbs, incense, and something else, something coppery. Walls were covered in darkened script, blackened by smoke, scrawled in streaks that looked too thick for ink. The floor was layered with ashes. At the center, upon a low altar, lay the child, still wrapped, still preserved, though its skin had shriveled into leather. A wreath of wildflowers, brittle with age, crowned its skull, and beside it, Alice, her hair tangled, her face pale, her eyes alive with a zealot's fire. She raised her hands as the men stormed in. "Do not touch him," she cried. "The promise is near." The men faltered. It was not madness they saw, but conviction. She stepped forward, clutching the corpse to her breast as though it still breathed. Some men claimed later that its lips twitched. Others swore they heard a rasp of air escape, like the first breath of the dead. One villager broke the trance. He hurled his axe at the altar. Wood splintered. The corpse slipped from her arms, striking the stones. Alice shrieked, not the cry of grief, but of rage. She lunged at the man, clawing his face, drawing blood. Others seized her, bound her arms. Still she screamed prayers, curses, promises. Her voice shifted, low and guttural, then high and piercing, as if more than one tongue spoke through her. When they dragged her into the street, she would not release the body. She clung until her nails tore. Only when 3 men forced her fingers apart did the infant fall from her grasp. Witnesses said the body landed with no weight, like dry parchment. Others swore it writhed. The priest was summoned. He wept as he saw the altar. "This is not faith," he declared. "This is blasphemy." But when he tried to touch the corpse, his hands shook. He hesitated so long that villagers began to mutter. Finally, he commanded them to bury it in unhallowed ground. But Alice laughed. Bound in chains, dragged to the square, she spat at their feet. "You bury only flesh," she hissed. "The soul waits. He will rise, not in the earth, but in you." Her words struck deeper than any wound. That night, none slept. Mothers clutched their children. Men guarded their doors with torches. For though the corpse lay in the dirt outside the village, more than one swore they heard it crying from beneath the soil. In the weeks that followed, Alice remained imprisoned. Yet the town did not heal. Animals sickened, milk soured, infants grew weak. The people whispered that she had cursed them, that until she was purged, the dead child's spirit would gnaw at their lives. Some demanded her execution. Others begged to send her to the bishop, but the council hesitated. For though they despised her, none could forget the moment she screamed in the square, and for one impossible second, her child seemed to open its eyes. The memory haunted them more than the crime. The council finally ordered a tribunal. Not a true trial, for law had no shape to fit her crime, but an inquiry meant to quiet the people. Alice was dragged into the hall, bound at wrist and ankle, her eyes wild yet unbroken. Before her sat priests, nobles, and elders, faces pale not from authority, but from unease. They asked simple questions. Did she know the child was dead? Yes. Why keep it? Because he is not gone. What proof had she? Every breath you take. The words unsettled them more than denial would have. Her voice was not shrill, but calm, steady, as though she spoke a truth none could contradict. The priest demanded to know the source of her symbols, the blackened scrawl that lined her home. Alice only smiled. "They are prayers," she said, "but not in your tongue." When pressed further, she refused. One elder accused her of witchcraft. She did not protest. She leaned forward, chains rattling, and whispered, "Then burn me and see if I rise." Gasps filled the hall. The accusation turned from blasphemy to fear. For what if she did rise? What if in killing her, they granted her prophecy? The tribunal adjourned in chaos. The crowd outside howled for blood, yet the leaders could not agree. Some urged the stake, others exile, and still others argued she must be handed to the bishop's court, lest they risk judgment themselves. But before any sentence was sealed, something happened. That night, guards reported hearing a sound from her cell. Not screams, not prayers, a lullaby. Low, sweet, unmistakably directed to someone unseen. When they opened the door, Alice was cradling her own arms, as if the child had returned. They swore they saw movement, a shifting in the crook of her elbow. One faint cry before vanishing into silence. Panic spread. Guards refused to enter again. Word reached the town by dawn, and by morning, mothers clutched their infants, weeping. If Alice could call her dead child back, what would stop her from calling theirs? The council made its choice. At sunrise, she was to be marched from the village, chained and barefoot, to be delivered to the bishop's men 2 towns away. But whispers spread among the mob gathering in the square. She would never make it there alive. The morning of her removal drew the whole town into the square. Mothers held their children. Men carried stones. Even the priests stood stiff, their lips white from pressing prayers that sounded more like curses. Alice was brought out, chains dragging, barefoot across the mud. The corpse child, long since buried in secret, was not with her, but the people swore they smelled decay trailing after her, as if the child still clung to her body. The guards pushed her forward. The mob spat, shouted, demanded she confess. She did not. She only kept murmuring words none could understand, over and over, like a charm wound too tight. Halfway down the road, the mob surged. Stones flew. One struck her temple. She staggered, fell to her knees, yet still she smiled. Someone cried out, "She bleeds black!" Another screamed, "She calls the dead!" The guards lost control. The crowd rushed in, fists and boots raining down. Yet the strangest detail survives in every record. Through screams, through blows, through the chaos, Alice never once cried out. Her lips kept moving, forming those unknown words, even as teeth broke and blood filled her mouth. By dusk, the road was empty. No guards, no tribunal. Only a body trampled into the dirt, unrecognizable, but still faintly smiling. The council claimed later she had been taken safely to the bishop's men. That was the official story. But villagers whispered they saw her rise that night. Some swore they saw a woman, broken and barefoot, walking between the cottages, humming the lullaby. Dogs howled, infants wailed without cause, and then 2 mothers found their newborns lifeless in their cradles, tongues blackened, symbols carved in ash across the walls. Alice was gone, but her words, her prayers, whatever they were, remained. History tries to close such cases with tidy phrases: madness, heresy, hysteria. Alice was written into the margins as a warning, proof of what happens when grief curdles into blasphemy. The church moved on, the neighbors buried their unease, the house was burned down and left as rubble. Yet silence never really follows stories like this. Travelers who passed through the ruins in the years after swore they heard the sound of a cradle rocking behind shattered walls. Shepherd boys said they saw chalk marks appear fresh on stones, even in the rain. And the midwives who had once condemned her kept a quiet, guilty pact. They would never repeat the symbols they found, the ones they still remembered from her walls, the ones they sometimes caught themselves drawing without knowing why. The baby had never risen, the body had decayed, yet the idea, that unbearable hope that the dead might stir again, spread like mold through the community. Mothers whispered prayers to their infants that mixed holy words with scraps of Alice's chant. Fathers carved protective signs into doors, not knowing if they repelled her or invited her in. What unsettled historians most is not the grotesque devotion to a corpse, but the way the town learned to live with it. 2 years of pretending nothing was wrong, of walking past a woman and her dead child as if she were simply a widow with a living one. That silence, complicity more than fear, was the true legacy. And maybe that is the question we're left with. How many times in history has horror hidden in plain sight, tolerated until it grows too loud to ignore? How many rooms and how many houses still keep their own secret dead while neighbors look the other way? They say Alice died in the dirt that day, beaten to pulp by her own people. But her smile, her silence, and the symbols on her walls keep resurfacing in the margins of history, unwelcome, unexplained. So the final question lingers. Did the town destroy her, or did they carry her curse forward, each generation whispering the lullaby of a corpse baby that never stopped waiting to wake?